Hello, and welcome to the very first open ended panel discussion titled The Selfish Nature of Adaptation featuring Blonde, starring Anna de Armas and CGI baby fetuses that I had hoped to never see again after Inside. Spoiler alert, I'm your host, Ian Taylor, but not tonight. These discussions are actually being hosted by my very good friend, Darryl Ayles. Daryl, why don't you explain a bit about yourself and how you came to the idea for this awesome
Well,
discussion? Sorry, I am completely blanking right now.
yeah, no worries, dude. How's it going, everybody out there in Radio Land? You've probably heard me here and there on the podcast if you're familiar with the podcast. And, long story short, these boys have been pulling a huge weight the last few years, doing an insane amount of reviewing movies. So, to ease it up, Steve and I were trying to take over a couple weeks to just not be 3 movie weeks so everybody can kind of get back to normal. And we're trying to make hay while the sun's up, so trying out new formats and everything while we're at it. For a long time now we've kind of toyed around the idea of kind of honing in on a smaller, well, smaller in a way, but like a a smaller scale topic to just kind of hash it out, have a nice little panel discussion about. And Blonde was kind of a really good sparking point for that for everyone, because I really do think that, like, if out of nowhere there was like a huge discourse on a film for the first time in what felt like forever, and there was a lot of interesting reasoning behind it, and I thought digging into all that could be pretty interesting. And on top of that, the topic of adaptation can go pretty deep in and of itself. Like, this is a brand new month and we're trying to do, themes to each month now. We're just kind of going with the flow of, what the
Mhm.
themes of each month tend to be. And for November, we're kind of leaning into, this, I don't know, like war in general kind of, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that one.
Yeah. How about
People's
this?
history.
We've
Take
all
her
been
over.
extremely burned out doing the show every week for 3 movies. So we started this podcast because of the pandemic, and it made sense because we were all stuck at home, not able to work, not able to socialize, not able to do anything. So what better way to occupy our time and to make the most of our film degrees uh, without having film jobs than to get on the internet and talk about movies. So doing this show where we pair 3 movies together that have some kind of shared theme in common every week made sense. Now that the world is more or less back in order, big asterisk next to that. Anyway, now that we're like all out and about working jobs and life is catching up to us, doing this show like an episode a week with around 3 movies is a lot. And we've all been pretty burnt out. So the whole point of this was to try to just break out of the formula a little bit. We're still doing the episodes 2 times a month instead of 4 times a month. And this is just more of a way to have fresher ideas come in, to look at new things that come up. Because we don't always get to look at new films or new stuff that people are hot in the topic of that's in the zeitgeist of discussion. So the whole point of this is to try to break from the mold and be able to look at what's new that's coming out, what's hot, what's interesting, or just to have kind of an open discussion uh, about films that are interesting. And just to be more open with that format, anyone can drop in at any time. Anyone can drop out at any time. We call those an Irish goodbye, or at least Tad does. Anyway,
Oh yeah. Oh no, we
um,
do. I'm sure
so
that'll happen.
And
Hey.
Steven, oh god, Steven is the worst offender of that,
Yeah.
and I really hope
no,
he's listening.
but no, for real though, Steven's been going through a lot of personal stuff. We're not
Oh
gonna
Yeah.
dish
Yeah.
it
I'm
out here.
sorry, I'm sorry.
We wanted him to be here tonight because I know he has some hot takes on this movie, and we would have loved to have hear it. But he's going through a lot of personal things, so we all wish him the best. And yeah, uh, send money if you
And
can.
Yeah,
and I will
booty
take full
booty.
credit for that, right? Like, it's definitely on me. I out of nowhere, like once every 7 8 months, I get like the migraine to end all migraines, and it happened to be on Thursday when we wanted to go live originally. So I definitely take full blame for all that. But hey, we were able to. It kind of works this way. I can sit down with the two creators of the podcast, and we're also joined by my lovely spouse Jamara Forbes, who is currently, we got a baby on hand over here, so she'll be popping in here and there. But you know, just sitting down with the three of you and kind of trying out this new format, and hopefully the first of many. I'll also say shout out to Aaron for dropping by and listening in right now. Yeah,
Yeah, thanks for being here, buddy.
I
Yeah,
think that's every. Yeah, yeah. I'm not forgetting anyone. Yeah, yeah. We're
yeah.
good.
Thanks for haunting me with that vivid image of Hotel Mario. He's gonna be
Um,
staring at me while talking about Blonde, and that face is gonna be an appropriate face for this discussion.
Before we start, is there anybody I should ping? I think there were some one or two people that also wanted to drop in, if I'm
Hey,
remembering correctly.
Kay Greedy had some interesting thoughts if she was interested in like she was kind
Yeah,
of
let me
because
see.
hey, if people are down, if not it's perfectly fine. My buddy Christian was also, it didn't really work out time wise as well as Thursday did. And I've got another friend who is a big Marilyn Monroe fan who can come out. So if anybody else wants to join in, we got the spots this week. But yeah, without further ado, I do kind of have like a little jumping off point. Just the way I kind of saw all this blonde stuff going down. It was very interesting because like Ian was saying, we may not be as typical of a review kind of episode, but for me, it was a lot more like in the wake of what the responses were, because I think
Oh
it
yeah.
really shined a light on like the idea of biopics, the nature of exploitation, because really I personally saw a movie about somebody who was exploited, and I think a lot of people saw it as just re-exploiting her instead of shining a light on things. But even beyond that, I think there's a question about the adaptation and the realness and the accuracy, because people weren't really all up in arms when Bohemian Rhapsody was just rewriting history for the sake of a plot and
Well,
willy-nilly.
Well, I was.
And
I don't know if I
well, I
agree with
mean,
that actually.
widespread. Like, I don't think
Uh,
like the common person was complaining as much as like I just heard an
No,
outpour
they
of like
got like
screw this when it
th- th-
hit
lawsuits.
Netflix.
So yeah.
Every
no. There's a lot of people that love Bohemian Rhapsody, and what's funny about this film, and we're not going to get into spoilers yet, but so when we hit the 100th episode of our podcast, we decided, let's do an episode where we talk about movies that we might rewrite or we might reapproach the material. And my pitch for Bohemian Rhapsody uh, probably isn't that far off than what the pitch was for this film, but it's for Marilyn Monroe instead of Freddie Mercury, where I wanted it to play out almost as like a semi-debaucherous fever dream, where it's just sort of the high of Freddie, being a rock star and maybe trying to find something he's missing in all that. And yeah, that's pretty much what this movie is, but for Marilyn Monroe. And now that we have this as an example, so like Bohemian Rhapsody's on one end of the spectrum where they're playing it way too safe and they're really trying to create like a brushed polish, nostalgic, rose-colored glasses look
an
at the
overcorrection.
legacy of the band.
Yeah,
And
Yeah.
Blonde, arguably, is the complete opposite in a sense where how do I even put it into words? Um,
Do
it's
it.
visual jazz.
visual jazz,
I've
visual
been leaning into
jizz.
this whole time in the
No, no,
Discord chats. Yeah,
no, no. Okay, we'll get into it. There are some amazing. There's a lot of technical stuff that's interesting here, where they're trying to verbatim recreate photographs of Marilyn, and that's the whole motivation behind the aspect ratio changes, which is kind of a neat experiment. But also, I think from a storytelling standpoint, it feels kind of all over the place and random and arbitrary, perhaps. Although I kind of liked this chaos that they were presenting. There were some amazing transition shots. Like for the first half hour of the film, I was completely enthralled by it. I was absolutely in love with how it was telling its story and what it was doing. Once I got into the group of things, and once they were telling kind of Marilyn Monroe's backstory as where her real name's Norma Jean and kind of the uh, terrible upbringing that she had with a very mentally ill mother who keeps weaving this myth of this father figure in her life that she's always kind of longing for. It's almost like a rosebud she never had kind of thing, which I thought was all really cool and really interesting. Although it kind of does this for the entire duration of the film,
Yeah.
and which, again, I was absolutely enthralled and loving it for the first, I'd say, solid hour. Although I had to stop at a certain point because I ran out. It was a movie was longer than what I thought, and I started it too late. And then I came back to it and kind of got back into what was going on, and it was just kind of overwhelming at times, and it felt like maybe they could have adopted different lenses to look at her life, where she's sort of oscillating between the glitz and the glamour and sort of the trauma of holding up that image, rather than just the trauma of holding up that image. So maybe that's where the criticisms I think are very valid for this. So I think, although I do think a lot of people misunderstand the intent of this film, um, it isn't a necessarily a faithful biopic. It's more of like a fictitious experimental reimagining of what her life and inner turmoil must have been like, which I do which I did like. I was absolutely loving this film for the most part, although there's definitely some very problematic areas, and the fact that it's about a real person is also very dicey. So there's a lot of criticisms that have come out about the film since that are really impeccable. Um, and it's kind of hard to argue for, although I see that Steven gave it like a 4.5 star rating. I'm just
Yeah, well,
reading.
it's the structure, right? Like, I don't think the structure's comforting. Like, I think that's what
No,
you're
it's not.
talking about,
I
right?
think
Like,
for
and
people
I
that,
don't think
yeah.
that leads into the polished nature of the biopic, right? Like, to
No,
me,
yeah.
everything you're saying, it touches on these ideas of like the anti-biopic that I think this film really and truly is. Like, there's a point where she
Hmm.
looks into the camera and says like, "Who are you to know my life?" And I think that goes beyond everything else. Like, I feel like there's this larger statement about like how we glorify and how we mystify these somewhat
Yeah.
questionable people and how we want that. So like he's kind of taking like I don't know why I keep calling it, but like almost like a Harmony Korine approach of like, we're gonna go to this scene and it's gonna feel like a photograph and it's gonna be that emotion, but it may not be like a grounded, helpful, plot moving scene. Like, I feel like there was this emphasis on, you know, having a freedom to every single scene to film it how it needs to be shot. Because my argument is that like I don't think the crazy visuals are a deterrent for me. I thought every time they were doing something, I don't think it was as simple as like always recreating a photo. I think it
Hmm.
was more so like, if it really needs to feel claustrophobic and drained, just shoot it 4:3 black and white. And like if it really wants to feel like a happy memory, pull out the diffusion, pull out the glossy, saturated film stocks. Like, I feel like there was this intention behind almost everything that a lot of people are kind of just throwing to the mud and calling like, exploitative or like
Yeah,
just
it's exploitative.
fetishizing.
Yeah.
And I don't think
Yeah.
that, to me, when you fetishize something, it should be like, you could see somebody being turned on by what you're seeing, but there's no moment of Blonde that I could feel like, maybe the waterfall sequence since it's so early on, but I mean, like, once you're in the movie, it's not like, her
Oh no, I
having
was.
her boobs out when she's getting beat up by Joe DiMaggio is a sexual thing. It's like showing how uh defenseless she is, and how, like, it's done for reasons. And I think a lot of people just think it's because it's their attachment to Marilyn, right? Like, at the
Yeah,
I
yeah.
core of
think,
all
And
of
and
this.
and,
yeah.
and, that, and that's what I think this film really puts in the forefront of question, is people's attachment to this persona or this legacy of Marilyn, where we don't really know the real person. We've never met her. She's since passed, and we don't know who Norma Jean really was. Really, we just know what we're told by the press and by these things. And I feel like this film was attempting to get to like the heart of her, possibly, although it's a little dicey in itself that way, because it's like a refictionalization, but it does throw into question people's attachment to the persona of Marilyn. And I do think that's why it's very fitting that it's called Blonde, because it's not really about Marilyn or Norma Jean, it's about our perception of her. And I think, it's like holding a mirror to, people's image, people's view of her image of her. So
Yeah,
I
it's
do
it's
think that's I
demonizing the
think it's
Marilyn
I think
figure.
it's absolutely brilliant in that sense.
Well, I think my biggest problem with this movie is that this was the wrong celebrity to do this approach for. And now that you
Was it?
mention Freddie Mercury, Devin, I almost wonder if that would have been much better suited for this kind of material. Because that's something like we always hear about in passing, but we never really delve into detail. Like,
No.
what was
And
his
that's
like promiscuous life really like? Like, how painful was like the downfall of sex and drugs and rock and roll? That's something that was like really glossed over Bohemian
oh
Rhapsody. But if
yeah.
it had
Well,
No,
something
that's
like
that's that's
this,
exactly what I
like
wanted. That's
really
exactly what I wanted for
leaning
Bohemian
into it,
Rhapsody was.
it may have
Yeah.
worked better. But I think the problem is when people talk about Marilyn Monroe outside of her movie roles, it's all about the sex scandals. It's all about how she was abused growing up, and it's all about like her crazy mother. And that's all this film is. This film doesn't really explore anything new, but it keeps insisting that it is. It's not the exploitive nature that really bugged me about this movie. It's who they're doing the exploitative nature for, and pretending that it's like so clever to tell us
Well, I think
everything
it's
we
meant to
already know
be.
about the character,
I think
and
it's
that bugs
meant
me.
to be an antidote to the legacy and the thing. It's not a direct attack. It's more like it's
It
like
kind of
a
feels
counter.
like it is.
It's
No, no. My
it's a
counterpoint to
complete.
that,
It's a counterpoint.
right.
It's a counterpoint to her legacy, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah, and that's my counterpoint to that idea that this isn't the right character to do it with. I think to me there is no history of like severe mental illness with Freddie Mercury, and there's a lot of the structure, like we've talked about, and how anti-biopic move, like that all leans into like her mental stability, and we can explore that visually through a lot of like the later third of the movie. You know what I'm saying? Like we really get into this like visual state where like things just become hazy and like intentionally out of focus, and like you play into this
Handheld.
idea. Yeah, exactly. Oh, so handheld. But you play into the idea of this like mental health, and you try and visually represent that. I think maybe that's being more true to the idea of somebody with mental health issues trapped in the spotlight. Like I don't know, to me that fits this
But
structure
that's
more
that.
than if you were to do it with Freddie Mercury,
That's like a
you know?
30-minute movie. Like I'm kind of with
Yeah.
Devon, where like the first 30 minutes, I was like, hey, you know what? Like this isn't actually that bad. This is really unique and engaging. But as it went on and on and on, this movie's way too long. Like you gotta at least give it that. Like it really outstays its
Yeah,
welcome
I mean,
by
that
a
was always
large
our main
margin.
complaint.
Yeah.
You know, me and Tad had very similar views to this movie after he saw it, and it
And
was
it's
like,
just the
you
same
just need to
shtick
shave it.
It's
over and
pretty.
over
Well,
and over again.
but
There's
you want to
lots
feel
of bits that
trapped
are.
in that, right?
Well,
So,
Yeah.
I guess, but like there were so many points where I'm just like, I get it. I get it. Let's move on to something else. I get it. Like to hammer its points home, it really feels like it has to boil down to like a really exploitative nature. Like I didn't need like a
yeah,
fictional rape scene. I didn't need like
Well,
characters
no,
basically
that was
explaining
definitely,
the
I,
messages of the movie to us. Like I feel like it's
I,
just too much for too
There's one
long.
thing I will say. Of all the abortion scenes we've watched this year, this is
oh my
one of the more
God,
tasteful. Okay,
tasteful, but
That's not
fucking
saying much. That's
quantity,
not
I'm
man.
saying.
There's
gonna.
so many of them.
Yeah,
Like to watch that in a
I
theater with my nine
I
months
know
pregnant wife was,
that
or
no
child
that was
was
a bit much. I
that was
horrible.
agree.
way too much.
And
One was
also
fine.
there's like the part that she goes back and recalls it, and it's just like it's like really hitting it home. And it's not the movie itself that it's just the fact that this kept coming up with all the movies we watched this year. This is part of the
Yeah, that's
reason for
wild.
the burnout. But I just like to mention that I can count on almost two hands the amount of films we watched this year that had trauma, birth trauma scenes in it.
And you didn't even watch Roma either, which is
Oh,
wild.
Yeah,
Like, so
that's
we're
not
not
oh,
getting into
tasteful. Yeah.
that.
I
I
I've seen it before, but I forgot that. Thanks for reminding me.
oh,
Um,
sorry.
Please, someone do not recommend Roma. We don't need another one of these type of
No, no,
movies.
Well,
right?
For the love
Um,
of God.
and here's my other counterpoint to that is that I think with a movie about somebody who, the implication is she commits suicide, you want to put the viewer in those same shoes. Like I reference this a lot when we talk about The Irishman, where I feel like the success of that movie is it traps you like in the same way that like old age traps you. Like you want the movie to end, but it's not ending. Like I feel like that's kind of the same thing applied here. Like it
I
wants to put you
that
in this
movie
state
had
where
more
it
going for
feels
it,
never
though.
no,
ending
no,
Yeah.
and you want
no,
to
I
leave it,
think
but she
I,
can't.
I
Sorry.
agree. I think that's why we understand why she, took her own life by overdosing on pills by the end, because we felt trapped in this movie like she probably felt trapped in her life, in some ways. So I
Which
do
again
think it
didn't
worked.
doesn't
Yeah,
fit if you're thinking about like Freddie Mercury wise, right? Like I feel like the
true.
ending kind of takes a big shift when you lean into the debauchery. Like you kind of have to clean up and
Mhm.
kind of like straight out of Compton it, you know?
True, but no,
Um,
I think I'm just liking the artistic approach to the subject matter, um, and that's what I would have liked to see for Freddie Mercury. I would have liked to have seen
yeah.
Sacha Baron Cohen go full out with
Oh,
the role because he wanted to.
so
He absolutely
badly.
wanted to,
Quite
and
literally. Yeah.
the band members were kind of making it about them as much as Freddie, and and that's valid in a sense. But I think when you can easily, verify or unverify some of the stuff they showed, it's like, what is even truth? We're only told what the media says or what other things say. So that also is kind of thrown into question. And I
Well,
think,
that's the
yeah,
anti-biopic sense of it, right? Like they lean into
yeah,
it. Yeah.
no,
Continue,
it's
sir.
exactly. And I would have liked to have seen those kind of hazy fever dream things with Freddy's life.
I
And I would
yeah.
have, yeah.
Now that I mention
But
it, like it just feels like it would fit that kind of character more. Like, and back to like the abortion scenes, like like one.
why
I
are you
don't know
bringing
why
this up
one.
again?
Yeah,
Well,
we're going back.
yeah, I don't know why one wasn't enough. Like, show one and imply the others. Like
Well,
that's it.
Well,
That's all you need to
uh,
do.
if she
she,
had three, like, that
Yeah,
would be
she had
physically
three,
taxing on a
but
woman, right? So
yeah,
you
it
don't
would be.
want to
yeah.
just gloss over it and say like, oh, you see her go to like a whatever, sit in a white room, skips to her shooting gentlemen prefer blondes. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
There's
I don't think that's
ways
the same.
you can shoot around that though. Like the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo remake by David Fincher. Like a quick spoiler. Speaking of adaptations, it's
Yeah.
kind of like a good example of that, where it's like they don't show like the infamous grape scene, but they do an excellent job of implying it, where like she has to limp home and take a shower in blood, and like she's
Yeah, you get
physically affected by this. Like that's so much better and more effective than
and
just showing like three really gruesome abortion scenes over and over again. Like, look, isn't she suffering? Like, yes, we know. Everybody knows this. This is the point everybody made about Marilyn Monroe. Like, I don't know
Well,
what you're
I
adding
don't
to the
believe that,
conversation.
man. Like, we're talking about a figure who's 60 plus years gone. Like, you're not everybody knows this. I didn't know
Well,
fuck all about her
well,
life.
I mean,
You know?
anybody who like talks about her on, well, what's the best way to put this? Like anybody who talks about her
Anybody who's written a
regularly,
think
anybody who
piece.
delves into like the history, yeah, like any like film theory
okay.
class or anything like that. Like
I,
that's
I
what
have
they
a
bring
She's
up
got
question.
about her.
stands, man. She's got
I have
stands.
a
That's it.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I don't know
shoot.
about you guys. I have older relatives, grandparents who grew up with, while these stars were at their peak and while they were the, people in the world, then they probably have fun kind of memories of, these actresses in this time period, this golden age of Hollywood. Would you recommend this film to them?
No. And I don't even mean that in a negative way. Just the fact that it's, like you said, it's not the kind of film they're expecting. It's very
Yeah,
visceral,
those
very
are the people
brutal, very.
writing the reviews that are like, "This movie is garbage." Like
No, those are
they're getting
feminists.
so
Yeah.
no, no, yeah,
I'm
I think it's the people
I
that truly have an attachment to her that are the
Oh,
ones really losing it. And it's like,
absolutely.
yeah, but you don't get to
Is it her you have an attachment to, or is it her image that you've seen in
Marilyn,
films?
That's a good
Is
not
it
question.
Norma
Norma,
or
Yeah.
is it
Marilyn.
Marilyn?
It's
That's
Marilyn.
exactly it.
And that's
Marilyn.
what this
It's
Exactly
movie
it.
Marilyn.
attacks, right? And if you love that side of her, this movie is a giant middle finger to that. And it's like, dude, this is a fake persona. You know that somebody's underneath that, but you treat that as so much more important. Like that's why there's so many scenes of
Mhm.
like just panning across demon-faced crowd members. Like it really is
Oh my
excessive.
god,
You know what I mean?
those scenes I fucking love. They were nightmare fuel, but I loved where it's like their faces are just slightly exaggerated as they're saying Marilyn,
Oh,
and
I wonder if I
and,
can
and at
find it.
times their faces are blurred. Like, oh fuck, that was like sleep paralysis demon kind of. Mm. I mean,
Yeah, it's a good
it's
jump scare in the
unnerving, but
film.
it's
Yeah.
unnerving, but I love seeing it because that feels like such a visceral human thing when you're going through a lot of stuff and these faces just get blurred or exaggerated or grotesque. I like seeing that, or I don't like seeing it, but I like that being represented
The
as, oh,
representation. Yeah.
the representation of that kind of thing. Like people have,
And here's another thing people really aren't bringing up about this movie is that like
yeah.
there's a lot of critics being like, "Oh, it's the man's fault. Oh, it's like a man's sexist interpretation of Marilyn Monroe. Like he's just exploiting a woman." Even though we need to address this is based off a book written by a woman and is
Yeah.
apparently very accurate to the book. So my first question, good segue. Plenty of people complain about a movie or a TV show being like too inaccurate to its source material, but you guys think there could be something wrong with being like too accurate to the source material? Like an example off the top of my head is like Inherent Vice is often considered to be one of Paul Thomas Anderson's worst movies, and by that it's still pretty good. And that film is so true to the source material that PTA like apparently was literally copying and pasting dialogue from like the page to the
Hmm.
screen. So like can there
Which
be something wrong with like being too faithful to your source material, like with Blonde, like with Inherent Vice, or are there
I
any other
think it all
examples you guys can think of?
depends. I think it all depends on the source material and whether or not it's formatted in a way that is conducive to screen adaptation. I mean, people read these things and they think, "Oh, this would be great as a film." I do think that there is a necessary process, perhaps, to like you can improve on the subject matter, or you can translate things that translates better for storytelling on screen, and this always inevitably happens. But many people complain, and very rightfully so, that it's overdone, where they maybe sterilize or they just alter the source material to such a degree that it's barely recognizable, or they're doing it in a way that they think will pander to wider audiences rather than people that are fans of the source material of the book. Like book readers, when they really get into it, they sort of create their own relationship with it, and I think they all create their own image of what it plays out. So I think everyone's going to have different interpretations and ideas of how the source material should be adapted. But there are some things that I think a lot of people can agree upon, and it's like a case by case thing, and there is no easy answer to it. But I was so apprehensive about reading Dune before watching it because I didn't want to be one of those people that would like hate what the movie was because it didn't do this or that kind of thing. I mean, I kind of half read it and then watched the film. Um, I think I still like it. I still have to read through it, the rest of it, to see what I really think. But I was always so kind of stuck between those two because I didn't want to create an image in my head where I develop a certain expectation because I wanted to believe in what Denis Villeneuve was doing with that project that I just wanted to. Usually, when I hear enough good things about a film, I want to go in blind and just experience it firsthand and see how it hits me on a first watch. Um, I find that's how I can get like the clearest picture of what the film is about. Um, so when it comes to like adaptations like this, I'm always kind of stuck between, unless I'm already familiar with the source material. Like I remember reading Life of Pi when I was in high school and really connecting with it and really liking it. And then when I saw the movie, I thought, it's okay. Like there was,
Yeah.
even though there are some beautiful images in that film that look even better than how I imagined it, I did picture it in a slightly more grounded kind of sense. I'm not even sure how I thought of it back then, but it was like it was so long ago. Um, I'm also kind of interested and curious and nervous to look at what Peacock did with Brave New World because I remember reading that in high school, and there's no way that's ever going to be adapted properly. And actually, that's a book I think should change a lot um, in the adaptation. And there are certain things in that book that they won't even touch on today, I'm sure. Um, it's really more of describing of a world than it is a story for like the first half of it, if I remember correctly. Um,
Yeah, certain
so
things
I
don't
mean,
really
it,
translate the
yeah,
film well
it's
either.
like certain things work in writing that don't quite work on screen. So I think adaptation is
yeah.
necessary in order to translate it. But I think the real core question is, are you true to the spirit of what the book is trying to say? And are you like concentrating that into a potent formula that works for screen viewing? Like I want the gut punch, I want the emotional impact that the book has, but in movie forma, in movie
Okay.
formula. But it doesn't have to have everything in the book as long as I get the same visceral.
Emotions, yeah.
Yeah, as long you have to hit the key notes of what the book did for me as a reader, for me to really connect with what's happening on the screen. And if you can really concentrate and really hone in on what those key things are, and you hit all the right notes, you can kind of make it up in between. It's like jazz, as long as you're hitting
uh
the right. Maybe I mean
Hey, he did it.
yeah,
Hey,
this is
okay.
me
he did
talking.
the
This is me
thing.
talking out of my ass. As long
No,
as you,
no.
as long as you hit all the key points, and it has the potent emotional response that the initial story had, and it's true to the spirit of it, I think you can kind of get away with a lot of stuff in between.
Well, okay. I've got a really hot take reply answer thing to all of this, which
Dude,
yeah, is completely out of question for feasibility. But hear me out for a second. We should have never started adapting books into movies. Movies should have been their own thing. And I know this sounds insane hearing me say it, but Devin just convinced me of what he was saying. The reason that you love that, or like your idea of like, oh, take that feeling and recreate it cheaply, it isn't possible. It isn't physically replicatable because you like I can tell you from just editing a movie, like something long enough, like the smallest changes early on will detrimentally affect the rest of everything. Like I feel like the exact journey you take with a book creates that moment, and you can never quite be as big as that. Like people can say what they want about Endgame, but like it's not quite the same as the amount of years that led up to these first huge comic book crossovers. It's a different thing. And like by all means, there's a point to adapting certain stories and whatnot for certain reasons. But like how you're saying, like, oh yeah, just like jazz in between. Like I think inherently it's like a, what's that ship thing? Not Theseus's ship. Is that what it's called? But where like you
Uh,
take one thing away and you've like is it, and replace it, like is it the
it,
same ship? If you replace every piece, is it the same ship? Like to me, if one piece gets removed, that is not the same thing anymore. And I
Hmm.
only have this hot take because I just finished a movie where I adapted a podcast into a film, and it was the single worst writing experience I've ever had. I like the end result, but my god, adaptation is so fucking hard when it's you doing it. Like you were saying, like, oh yeah, it's pick this, pick that emotion, and then figure it out in between. Like people will pick and dissect that in between, man. You have to like
oh
physically
yeah.
create an entire new story. You can't like
Well,
it's
yeah,
wild.
and that's the thing.
Sorry, that's my rant.
It's kind of the threshold. No, I think that's a very valid point. I'm actually very curious about what that writing experience was like for you. Um, but yeah. I mean, man, it's so hard to hone in on.
No,
And
and
by
I'm
the
not
way,
knocking you either. Like
yeah,
don't make it sound like, I think that's just, again, it was a very
yeah.
hot take, my own perspective. I think you're totally
I could
valid.
be very well talking out of my ass because I haven't tried adapting a thing verbatim directly. I always try to come up with my own things based on stuff. Although, as Orson Welles say, there's nothing worse than an homage film. So, thanks for that advice. I'm gonna try to keep my sources very well buried.
Yeah.
But actually, this I was gonna bring this topic up, but on the other end of the spectrum, you have guys like Stanley Kubrick, who does adapt source material but completely puts it in his own light and changes everything. And this is the expression that I love to use that as aptly described Stanley Kubrick's adaptation process. He ruins great books by making fantastic films out of them.
Exactly. You almost have to break it down fully, right? Like,
And
and
even
create the
though
movie.
he pissed off Stephen King and Anthony Burgess to no end for their abhorrent rewriting of their material to the screen, I think they arguably, well, I have to read the books myself to see what exactly was altered to really have a more informed opinion, but those films are legendary for many reasons, and I think they make a for a very potent experience watching it. That could be very different from the source material, but nevertheless, it's coming from it. And what Kubrick tried to always hone in on with his adaptation is he wanted to create his experience of reading it for the first time. It says when you have material that you're reading and reacting to, it's the reaction that I think he pulls from. It's this isn't an adaptation of Clockwork Orange. This is my reaction to reading a Clockwork Orange that I'm adapting, and that's actually the closest to the source material he ever got when making a film, where he got a script from the original author that he hated and he tossed it, and he took the book and just dog-eared and made notes and picked it apart and put it back together, and he used the book directly as source material, but fucked with it in the best possible way.
Oh
Well, that
man.
was going to be my second question, actually. Is it more important to be accurate to your source material, or is it more important to be faithful to your source material? Like, compare, like, Lord of the Rings. Well, compare, like, Rings of
What do you
Power
mean
to
by that?
House of the Dragon. Like, Rings of Power is getting torn to shreds by fans. Like, people are so pissed about, like, the lore changes they've made and how they changed up important characters and important events that happened in the book. But you compare that to House of the Dragon, where George R. R. Martin openly admitted that they made pretty blatant changes to certain characters, including King Viserys. I'm terrible with names, so Viserys. Yeah, I think it's King Viserys. But people love it because it captures the spirit of Game of Thrones, and while it may not be entirely accurate to the source material, it still captures the spirit of what Game of Thrones is all about, like the political manipulation, the mind games, the emphasis on character over spectacle. Like those were all things people loved in the earlier seasons of Game of Thrones, and that show captures it beautifully, even if it does make some changes.
Well, I mean, to answer your question, I think we could pick a great example of going back to Blonde and something that
Hmm.
was happening in the conversation of her accent and the accuracy. Like I would have preferred somebody like Anna do it, who's going to give you the performance that feels like Marilyn, than her trying to adapt and be super accurate and like kill herself over the accent, or the opposite, having an impressionist come in and trying to get an impressionist to do like maybe half or three
Nah, that
quarters
wouldn't
of
have
the
worked.
performance.
Yeah.
Well, you know what I
No,
mean?
it's
That's
like
the thing, right? They'll hire certain people just because they look and feel exactly like it, regardless of their talent, and that's
mhm.
a
And it's
prat
like
or pitfall of sorry.
and I think once you get into the groove of the film, you kind of start forgetting that that's Ana de Armas, and that's really the point. It's like even if I do a side by side comparison, I can see Marilyn's a very different person with very different like kind of a voice and
Features, yeah.
even and some mannerisms. The fact that Ana de Armas embodies her, and believes that she is her for that duration of time, it suspends my disbelief, and I'm just kind of in the moment with her. Like even though physically there's differences, it doesn't really matter because she's giving her all into that performance. And if her Colombian accent slips through, it doesn't take me out of it because she's being authentic to the character in her mind still.
But that's just it, right? I feel like we may feel that way, but with a large portion of these haters that seem to come out of the woodwork, a large portion of which didn't even watch the movie because it got such bad reviews in the beginning. But like all
Oh
they
yeah.
needed to do was listen to a trailer and say, "Oh, I hear Cuban. Marilyn Monroe wasn't Cuban," and it's just like from there on,
Colombian.
you're just kind of getting, or sorry, you know what I mean? It's just getting
I
on
know what you mean.
on a descent where they'd assume.
Oh yeah,
But
and
these
people
cares.
love to. I feel like people love to just categorize things in a little neat box. If something's good, worth my time. If something's shit, not worth my time, and they might just look at one or two things to determine one or the other. So this is why things easily get overpraised or overslammed. Just people are just trying to categorize the thing because people only have so much time to in their lives to be entertained, I guess. Which it sounds like a weird thing to say, but people want to prioritize things in their life is all I'm getting at. So people will be quick to make judgments just to try to categorize whether this is something they want to engage their time in. I guess for all of us, we are all like, this is worth checking out. Let's see what this is about. The reception at the time that we started talking about it at first, the letterbox curve was flat, where they were equal amount of people giving it high praise, low praise, and everywhere in between, which is so bizarre and so rare. Now, when I'm looking at the letterbox thing, it's more leaning to the negative.
Really
Um,
lean to negative. It has a 2.1 on Letterboxd.
And
It's
this is part of the
crazy.
issue with like Rotten Tomatoes too. Like I don't want to go off too much of a tangent because we have a couple different points to deal with adaptation we want to touch on. But like I feel like you've raised a good point about how there's a lot of movies that land right about on the line of Rotten Tomatoes, and
Sorry.
depending which way this handful of people sway, you either end up with this splat or this whatever, and then people are gonna take that,
yeah,
start making some assumptions, go from there. Like I feel like things aren't that ones and zero that or it's
black
not
and
all ones
white.
and
It's
zeros.
not
Yeah.
that black and white. It's a
Thank you.
gradient, really, and it's just
Really,
that
yeah.
but for our sake, for just having a clear thought about things, we like to categorize things, and this is just an intrinsic human thing. We just want to
Totally.
categorize things just so we can say, okay, here's where it is. And now I can move on with whatever bullshit I'm dealing with. That's this is just how people look at movies. But it is interesting to get into the weeds and unweave, see where the issues lie. I do think this film has problems. I loved how it was telling its story at first, but it did get overwhelming, and I did find myself kind of pausing it, doing something else, coming back to it. And I don't like doing that usually with a movie. I usually just try to like sit and engage and watch it all in one go. But sometimes life kind of distracts me or pulls me out of it for one reason or another. A little bit of everything all at once.
Mhm.
Um, but I always try to immerse myself in a film and give it my full attention to really give it the best chance of me experiencing it. I try to simulate that whenever I possible, which has been extra hard as we've done the show continuously uh, for the duration.
Hey
So I
man, you
felt
guys
like for
earned a little bit time off. Don't be too hard on yourselves.
Hey,
oh yeah, no,
that's
no,
Very well
I'm glad.
deserved.
No, I'm really glad that we are doing something different where we can just kind of hop in, let off some steam and pace out when we watch these things so that I can give it my full attention and I'm not neglecting other things in my life to do so. And
Yeah.
that's really the point, right?
No,
Um,
definitely, definitely. And I
yeah.
will say there was an aspect of this film where, like I was saying before, you do like in a theater it felt way more trapping than it did on Netflix. You
Oh,
know,
I can imagine,
it
and that would
really felt
be.
like two different things. Yeah.
I felt like if I did watch it in the theater, it'd be a very different experience, and
I
I
did
kind of.
watch it in the theater actually.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
boy,
you
Now that
posted
you
about it
mention.
so early.
yeah.
I knew you had
I
to have gone to the
I
Highland before I
watched
did.
Barbarian in the theater. That was fun.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah.
I got.
May not have been the best date movie. I'll just say that much.
Jesus Christ.
No, maybe not.
To close off
Yeah.
Blonde, had a third question. When it comes to films, TV shows, or games that are inspired by or based on true events, like what do you think it takes for an adaptation to become distasteful or exploitative? Like, is there a line that like a biopic should never cross? Is it necessary to depict a real event as close as possible, despite how disturbing it might be? How is the
I
best way to approach it around that? Like, what do you guys think?
I
I
think
mean,
it all
there's
depends on the source material
Well,
and
let's
yes.
say
how.
it's
That's what I was
something
gonna say too.
let's say it's something like Blonde, or it's something where there's like really extreme subject matter, like sexual assault or violence or anything, all the extremes. Let's say something like that.
Well, then it's probably going to become distasteful or exploitative to certain people, right? Like, I don't feel I feel like there's got to be an intention behind what the film's trying to do, and I
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
that will be kind of the live or die of the distasteful or exploitive. Because I think any person, it depends on how prudy you are too, right? Because if you just see the boobs, like the amount of boobs that are in this, and you never saw any of those distasteful photos of Marilyn in her life, and it's just like, oh,
Mhm,
Yeah,
well,
no,
that
right.
should instantly make you feel this distaste or feel exploitive because it's
mhm.
like, oh well, I'm seeing this image on a giant screen and that makes me feel away, right? So
Well,
much of this is per person. I don't think there's ever necessarily a line, right? Like I feel like if you're gonna accurately do like one of those crazy fucking rock star biopics, like if you don't show lines on asses and fucking trains of girls giving blowjobs, like is that inaccurate? Are you then being like it's a
I take.
weird line.
And now that you bring it up, I have to talk about the JFK scene because
Oh man.
that was one thing I was told about going in, and for some reason I was picturing it happening in a car, which is where his other head got cleared, not this one, not this one.
Boo,
Which,
boo.
but I don't know. The I laughed. I really I felt bad that I laughed like when it's like cross cutting of like I think it was
The
some
cross
ship.
cutting was awful.
That was
I
so
walked
bad.
out of the
I know
theater and was like,
it
that
it
was
it
not
it
needed. The
it
scene
it
was
it,
good
it,
without
it,
it.
it was like it was really on the nose or on the dick, however you want to put it.
It's
And
on the tip. Yeah.
at that point, I just fucking laughed like, wow,
There's a
I
like
few
mean,
wow.
moments I laughed at, to be honest. Yeah.
It's like this is meant to be a dark, gross, low point in her life that, this is for interaction with the president. That is just the coldest thing. He's literally on the phone talking about sexual allegations with other people while he's getting a blowjob from Marilyn Monroe. And that's like a horrific scene. But the way they edited it was hysterical. And uh,
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
I feel kind of gross about that, but the way they cross-cut it was just too funny.
yeah, I mean, take away the cross cutting. I think it's a very important scene where, like, in this place and time, like, the lead up to it is so, like, rough and she's so manhandled to the point
Just
where
so
it's like the highest
unceremonious.
level prostitute. Yes, exactly.
And
To
it's
the
like
point
he's
where,
just
like,
and it shows like him just being this like lazy ass and he's just trying to get it off while he's dealing with I mean, you
and
know.
it's all we get too, right? Like I think there's this aspect that people are more upset that's all we get with them when they might have wanted them to lean into the scandal of that. They
Oh
wanted to
yeah.
see them on their first date holding hands. You know what I mean? Like I can just imagine the other version of the movie that this would have been.
Isn't there an actual thing
that's
where she
combo
pops
one
out of
though.
a cake and says happy birthday, Mr. President? Like didn't that really
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah,
Yeah,
like that would have been
exactly.
interesting to explore actual character development,
That's not
but
in
no, you
yeah,
gotta explore.
no.
Yeah, that is
How is
interesting
that
to me.
interesting?
That's
That's
interesting
leaning
because
into the
there's development.
lies.
That's interesting because the characters are fleshed out and
That's not
interesting at
development
depth.
though.
That is
Yeah.
development.
No,
Just
you see
showing the
fat figure.
exploitative event is not character development. Like that, I was thinking that the entire movie. Like exploiting a character and making us feel bad for a character is not character development.
No, it
It's
didn't
what you
just show the
do.
event though. It's not
And
cutting to
that's
her
what,
sucking dick.
like,
There's a whole lead up to that. There's the beginning and ending of that. There's the friggin' abortion stuff that comes with it too. Like there's a lot of mistreatment of her that comes from him,
but
and I
that's
think a
all
lot
the
of
movie
people.
is, and that's my
That's
problem.
not what the movie is. That's
I don't
20
know.
minutes of the movie at
That's not.
most. It's more like 10, if not 15. It's just how, again, like I'm saying, because it doesn't do anything else, people are taking more offense. Whereas, like, I don't feel like I came to Blonde to see a fairy tale version of a
But
president
I
or
didn't go to
somebody.
see a fairy
Like,
tale
you
version
see,
either. But
go
there's
watch
ways,
Jackie. Jackie
like,
was
Eh,
just made. You know what I mean? Like, I
y-
feel.
there
I.
was Jackie and there was also Spencer.
But
I wish I started watching. I haven't finished watching that, but people have been saying
No,
that's a better like version of that story. I don't know if anyone
really,
else saw Spencer.
I heard mixed
I
opinions
think
about it.
the scene I think the scene would have worked better if it was just Marilyn Monroe going down on John F. Kennedy while her version of Happy Birthday to John F. Kennedy plays during the background.
Oh
That would
fuck.
have been better than the fucking
Oh, yeah, that the
like
cross cutting, yeah,
explosions and
yeah.
whatever. Yeah, 100%, man.
That
Well,
But
actually, damn.
That's my
I,
thought.
I think there's an important thing happening though that everyone's glossing over, which is like the feeling she has in the blowjob. Like I've personally never sucked dick, but it's a moment of like, sure, you talk about an event and you talk about this scandal. Like you said, it's this known idea, but to see it and be stuck in that moment with her, like a
and just how
physical.
cold of an exchange it was, and how just
Exactly,
like
and the thoughts of, like, she might as well be thinking about I can't remember the exact things she says about, like, how she's trying to take her mind off or how she ended up here, and it's
something
like
about swallowing pride, which
yeah.
I don't think that's what you're swallowing, but okay.
No. No, but it
No
is, like
subtlety,
you
Also,
yeah.
what did you guys think of the shot where it's a close up of her face and it's just pulling you out and you see like at the movie theater that you're supposedly in, and then it
oh,
goes
that was
back into it?
trippy, dude.
That was
That was
cool.
Oh
trippy as
yeah.
There's
heck.
a lot of
Like,
like cool
moments like that
technical
was so
aspects, yeah.
sweet. Again, visual jazz. They
It,
they were able to do
it-
so much
Visual
by approaching it without restrictions.
yeah,
I
That's
I
mean
don't.
visual
It just
is
felt
that
all style and no
oh.
substance. It's great
That better have been a
style.
Star Wars reference.
Yeah,
it
it's
was.
yeah.
Jizz, okay.
Hey,
This
good.
is what Netflix should be doing. Like
Bigger
these
swings? Yeah.
art house type movies where you can get like 100% freedom to do whatever you want and regardless of critical reaction because these kinds of movies like I haven't seen it myself but I do have desire to see it after hearing like
I would
people
yeah.
talking
No, no, Aaron, I agree with your sentiment, but I would watch it before you say anything else just about it. J I don't want people to come out of the woodwork and attack you for having an uninformed opinion is all I'm saying.
okay
Yeah,
I don't know, man. A lot of people do talk like in the other half of that is though like a lot of these criticisms come from people that haven't seen the movie. I've seen it a lot myself just in A24 groups and whatever. Like
Oh,
people
especially
want
the
to
A24
attack it without
groups.
ever seeing it. So I definitely recommend checking it out, Aaron. It's a pretty rough watch at times. Like I don't go in expecting like I feel like everyone I've warned that it's just not a pretty biopic, they end up liking it. It's just a lot of people were questioning whether it would be that, whether they would be getting a Bohemian
Uh,
Rhapsody and there's just a couple scenes of trippiness. But no.
it's like going into Bohemian Rhapsody thinking it was a western,
Yeah, yeah, there you go.
what I was
which
going to say is that movies like this are not made for today they're
No.
made forever.
mm,
yeah.
what do you mean
I
by
don't
that?
know. Yeah, go on.
No, no, what do you mean by that, Aaron?
Like it will
Budgetless,
last
right?
forever. Like when this generation and its mores change, and then the next generation and mores like rise up, and then like next it'll soon like let's say like my Daryl's grandchildren would see it. Is what I'm saying. Like
Well,
it will.
Well, you'd hope,
we'll have to see how it holds up against the test of time. That's for sure.
And
Yeah,
I'm
we'll
sorry
see.
for bringing your kids into this discussion.
No, I think it's worth saying that, like, of all the biopics we've talked about tonight, I could see this one being the one that gets taught in film schools
Mm.
versus, the ungodly amount of atrocious biopics that we've got. And to be fair, I did want to add this in. We don't have to stay on it forever, but I do think that Walk Hard affected the whole course of biopics. Like
Oh yeah.
we had a course
Oh
where like
dude.
all that was made was this polished crap, and then Walk Hard kind of stomped it out just
I love
swiftly,
that.
and then it slowly just came back. We had Bohemian get nominated, Elvis come out. Like there's just a lot of movies.
Oh,
We haven't talked much about Elvis and how that glosses over God knows how much.
Love and Mercy was one of the
Oh
best
yes,
reinventions of the biopic I've seen in a while, and
that's
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 where
a movie, yeah.
it was a lot. It took a risk and it got experimental, but I think it worked in terms of getting really into the spirit and the heart of Brian Wilson and what he was going through, and that is what I think a real good biopic should do, music biopic specifically. Um, I think this tries to do it with Marilyn, although I mean,
it has the
almost me,
benefit of him being alive,
yeah.
though. I will put the asterisk. It's
The
easier to make a movie with
This is
Ryan
true,
Wilson signing off
and
on.
even with him being alive, his reaction to it, it was he said it was so surreal. Like all the scenes with the psychiatrist who abused him, like really upset him just because that's what he really lived through, and it was very accurate. Although he thought the film was really well made, but he did find it still uncomfortable at times to watch. But he was really emotionally enthralled by it still, and I think he gave it high praise regardless. But it was difficult for him. I think this tries to do this with Marilyn, which I again, my initial reaction to it was very positive. I've just heard a lot of compelling kind of criticism against it since. That's making me question that a bit. I'll have to see how it holds up on a second watch for me. But
Yeah, but
uh,
this movie isn't like about the accuracy or the faithfulness,
no,
right? So it's about that first reaction you had, like as much
yeah,
as like it is based on this famous person, I think it's better that it's based on someone who's been dead for over 50 years than if this were to be taking
hmm
like to go back to your question, Ian, like to be taking these big exploitive swings on someone still alive would just be like
The worst, yeah.
defamation almost, right?
I
But
am
it's
very
not the
split
same.
on whether or not I want to show this to my grandparents.
Don't.
Don't.
Do not. Do
I
not
like
do
this
I
that.
movie, but don't.
They will
I've
never want
shown
to
them
speak to
some.
you again.
I've shown them some challenging stuff before. Or well,
Not
I
blonde.
remember one time, not blonde. I mean, we went and saw Theory of Everything together at one point. I remember, and they really liked that film. You know, it's just like an adaptation of Stephen King's life. Um, and it's pretty straightforward. Like
Got a bit of gloss,
It's
yeah.
got a great soundtrack. Yeah.
it's got a little bit of gloss, but I think it's true enough to his upbringing, and they really enjoyed that. Uh, this this the this one's a bit risky. I don't know
But
if I'd show this to them,
I
but
think
at the
we get a
same
lot of
time,
biopics like this about much older figures, though, like you're saying, like like the Shakespeares and like it's like people like to take bigger swings on biopics the
oh
longer
yeah,
someone's been dead. Because again,
I
like
mean,
Stephen Hawking's was alive when we got Theory of Everything, right? So
this
I
is
feel
true.
like
Yeah.
they fit very easily into that camp, wouldn't it?
Oh
But
yeah. I mean, we watched a film not too long ago, The Joan of Arc, which that's a historical figure. That's going way back. But and the film was considered sacrilege at the time
Yeah.
for how it depicted, her kind of struggle, and all of it's basically her trial before she was burned, basically.
yeah,
And I thought it was very, at least with the music that they added to it many years after the fact, I thought it was extremely compelling. And I'm not a super religious person, but I was praying by the end of it. Like, no, it's a very effective film, but we're also so disconnected from the actual person.
events,
It feels like the real person, as she might have been, based on what we know of what happened. But then again, this was hundreds of years ago, so that's an interesting
where's the line in
comparison to
that
make.
regard though, right? Like to what
That's
Ian
a
was
good
saying, like
question.
is there a hard line somewhere and we just haven't found it yet? Like in
And then
40 years, will we know?
the film nearly got destroyed also, just because of the
Yeah.
controversy surrounding it. And we're lucky that a copy of it was preserved. Period. Yeah.
Yeah, like
Plan G.
that's not like my problem with the movie. Is that like even besides like the controversial subject matter, I just don't find the movie all that compelling. Like if it was just a great movie, I wouldn't really mind so much. Like
What's your
Amadeus
metrics
and
for great?
Yeah,
well,
I think there's great things about
I
it.
don't know. Like I think it's very poorly written. Everything's on the nose so much that like it was just made my eyes roll. There were parts of it that were just laughable. We talked about the crossfading. honest. I feel so bad, but I laughed so hard at the CG baby scene in the theater because
Okay,
it's like there's no
at least
subtlety here. Like,
at
how
least
can
the
it be
CG
any less
baby was
subtle?
better than an inside, and
I
also
know it is on par
and
with that baby.
no,
I will fight you. It's on par with that baby.
objectively it's better, and also the reasoning for it being there is better. Man, I hated that movie Inside. God damn it.
Oh, I hate that
Yeah,
movie
no,
too, but
it's serving a purpose in this one.
the
so.
CG quality was about on par though, and that movie had
No.
much love. I don't know, man. I don't know.
I think you could cut like 5 minutes of just fetus footage. Like they kept overdoing it. That was the issue.
Yeah, like they keep overdoing it, but I felt that way throughout the entire movie. Like all of the characters besides Marilyn Monroe are one-dimensional and cartoony.
I
Like
might be a little out of pocket here, but Kane Greedy did bring up a point about it was weird having her talking to her fetus after the Roe. I don't want to bring the politics of Roe v. Wade in here, but I don't know that maybe the intent there was I know I feel out of pocket even bringing that up really. Um, I did think that might have been something Marilyn might have gone through, the sort of the guilt of having gotten rid of the first one, and then
Trauma,
I guess
man.
and then miscarried the second one by just falling. That was a horrific scene, just seeing her fall over and then her stomach's bleeding.
Oh,
that's
the
enough.
whole sequence with the house on fire and she finds the baby in the fucking.
That fire looks so bad.
It's not about the quality though. It's about the mental. Like I know it's not actually on fire. Like it's about.
But it is about the quality though.
It's about the Ian, it's not about the money. It's about sending a message.
But that's we've mentioned this on the podcast before, where it's like just because you're talking about an important message doesn't mean you get a pass. Like I feel like so many movies and TV shows these days are using that. It's a dream, but
that's the past.
Pearl used practical fire effects in that movie, had a $1 million budget. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
that's all
practically it is cheaper than CGI.
Ian, you have to think
it looks
had
better.
to have her. No, Ian, they had to have her running through the house for multiple shots to grab the baby. You're not going to risk actually lighting the actress on fire. For that.
I don't know.
To Aaron's point, it's about giving that big swing. Like, but could it have? Like, you say that like no, fire's one of the hardest things to do. Like, it is so fucking difficult. You have
it gets so out of hand real fast. Yeah.
Oh, that's fair, but the CG fire could at least look better.
No, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying CG, not practical. Actual CG fire is one of the most difficult things to do CG.
It is.
It's so hard to find actual basing stuff. The way it moves is so hard to recreate. It is like it's the thing you put in a dream sequence, so you don't have to waste more money than you should on.
No,
if it's a dream sequence, you get some leeway with it looking a little saucy.
I get it, but like it could at least look better. Like this movie had a decent amount of money put into it.
But you're nitpicking at this point.
Okay, well, if I'm completely unengaged with the story, then yes, I tend to nitpick a movie more, especially when it's nearly 3 hours long.
What unengaged you from the story? That's the real.
Again, like it's just there's no subtlety to the story whatsoever. I think that just made me completely unengaged. There's so many moments. You know what Bernard said? Bernard said about like the hate you give, where he's like, if you just held back a little bit more, if you just gave a little less information, like so many scenes could have been more potent. I was thinking that the entire movie. It's like if you just showed a little less, if you just said a little less, if you just relied on the acting more, like I needed more of that though. Like I've always felt like it just
to certain people.
I don't know. It always just felt like it went too far, and I was just completely unengaged. Like it felt like it was trying too hard to be edgy. Maybe it's not as bad as people are saying it is, sure, but it's still bad in my opinion, and that just completely unengaged me. Just the feeling that like it's less about and if it was like an atmospheric, creepy, interesting biopic, great. And you know who would do a great job of that? David Lynch. This guy really wants to be David Lynch, and I don't know if he quite achieves that.
I will say though, going too
feels
far,
like a poor imitation.
Yeah, but like going too far and everything being one-dimensional are definitely like an oxymoron to kind of put side by side. Because I do feel like it's one or the other in a certain like.
This film manages both
somehow.
Yeah, somehow. Yeah.
Regardless, I feel like there's a good enough jumping off point to kind of like like how you were saying the adaptation of real life events, like you could kind of relate that in the same regard, like how we said the whole war theme for the episode. How many fucking Call of Duty games only got
Oh
made
yeah,
because
that's a
they
good
were
point.
trying to be so accurate to certain events, certain things happening, certain paths across certain parts of Normandy. Like there was such accuracy, and it delves into jumping off walls, futuristic like laser bullshit, and like
Yeah, it lost its
it
hurt.
becomes a
Yeah.
shell of itself. But like, you know what I mean? I feel like there's bigger falls that people don't talk about in terms of like disrespect. Because to me,
Oh
it's like,
yeah.
how do you even call that the same franchise? It's like you're just milking a term at a certain point, and like wherein did the adaptation just fall to the wayside, right? Like
Yeah,
I
I
feel
agree
like
with
there
that.
was
Like,
something.
I think part of it too is that people are kind of more sensitive to that subject matter. Like, there's this whole thing going on. Like, people can't separate like fiction from reality. They're like, no, like this fiction is reality, to the point where there was like a video about a guy complaining that like orcs being bad guys in video games is racist, even though like tying orcs to black people in of itself is it has some racial implications in of itself, but it's just the whole fact that it's like we can't separate fiction from reality. And I think
I
that's a
agree.
big part of why like Call of Duty had to go the futuristic route, because like people just couldn't take like the quote unquote controversial subject matter and ties to the real world anymore. And it is kind of
But is that
unfortunate
because
to
of
see it go
time
down that
passing?
route.
Because I feel like a theme that keeps reoccurring with all of our little like mini discussions here is like the amount of time that's passed. Like, because I feel like they went from adapting things that happened over 50 years ago to adapting things that happened like 10 years ago in Afghanistan and stuff, right? So
Yeah,
I
like Modern
feel like
Warfare. Yeah.
when you have to step it up like that, it just becomes too close to home. So is that the line in the sand that we're
Yeah,
finding with
that might be.
adapting?
Well,
Like,
think about like Modern Warfare 2, and you probably know of the infamous like No Russian mission,
yeah,
where
yeah,
like
the
you
report.
shoot
Yeah,
like a bunch of people at an airport. Even though I'd argue like that it's kind of
Oh,
effective for the narrative in the game, because it is supposed to be this awful event that's basically cementing how sadistic the villain is in the game. And it's a good like
well,
gameplay way of exploring that, but people took that out of context and said like this is too close to like actual shootings in America. This is too close to like 9/11 paranoia, because this came out in like 2009. And like people shooting up an airport doesn't exactly bode well with some
but
well,
people.
Call of Duty Big Red One wasn't too accurate
Nope,
this
to
is
what
a
no.
actually happened, right? Like it's crazy.
well,
Sorry, Devin.
this is another offshoot from all this, but it does remind me of the school shooter episode we did, which that
Yeah,
wasn't controversial at all.
that was a
It's
fun
Oh,
one.
probably
Yeah.
our favorite episode that luckily no one's listened to. Um, but we had a discussion there about Elephant, um, which is a sort of a fictionalized adaptation or sort of experimental look at the Columbine shooting. And I really liked the film for what it was, mostly because as I was watching it, I was kind of thinking about my own experiences with high school, and I really felt kind of involved with what was happening there. There were some things that stood out that were kind of odd, but I think I ended up giving it a 5 because yours and Steven's perception to it was a lot more negative for good, and you had some very good reasons for it. So I kind of caved. Um, but I was kind of maybe giving that film a little more leeway, a little more praise. Although we all agreed that Polytechnique was, as far as those films go, a much more tasteful and faithful kind of adaptation of those true events. And that is a very tough and tricky subject matter that you really have to be careful when portraying, I believe. Which is why I absolutely vehemently was disgusted and hated Run, Hide, Fight, and Steven tried
It's in
with
on the joke. Yeah.
no, 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 no. Steven tried his damnedest to defend it, and good on him. Even though I thought it was complete trash, but entertainingly so in the worst ways. Um, but I'm just wondering what kind of correlation this has here. Like, how does what is Elephant to Columbine? What Blonde is to Maryland? Like, how does that compare? Is my question, I
Well,
guess.
my big problem with like Run Hide Fight real quick is that it doesn't feel genuine. It really does feel
Well,
Like,
it's not based on a real thing. It's just the fact that it's been such an ongoing problem. They're like, "Hey, why don't we turn school shootings into Die Hard?"
yeah,
And
like no, they just want to.
and also pump up our why we should have gun rights and we should be training our kids how to
Yeah,
use guns
I
because they could use it in this situation. Like it's conservatives though that really love that film for
I
that
don't
reason.
know. Like, it feels like they just picked a bunch of topics to get people angry, and because they're getting people angry, more people will inherently try to defend it and watch it. Because if you
Okay.
didn't have that kind of subject matter involved, nobody would watch One Night Fight. There's no way that film would have like a 9.0 user score. Like, I think they knew what they were doing with that movie, which honestly, in my opinion, makes it even worse. But let's
Oh
circle
yeah.
back
It,
to like Marilyn Monroe with Blonde, and like
I would.
Elephant just feels like a misunderstanding of the source material, whereas Blonde is like he understands the source material and he wants to do something completely different, which I respect wholeheartedly. I just don't think he succeeded. But that's more generous than what a lot of people are
Well,
saying about it.
as they say, hindsight is 2020. And I'm wondering if when Elephant was made, Columbine was still too fresh of a wound. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. I think Columbine happened in '99,
Let me look this
and
up.
yeah, fact check me on this, please. I don't want to.
Columbine shooting was 1999, correct?
Okay, yep. So that was '99. I believe on 420 as well. I might be wrong. Um, not that it matters. Elephant was made in 2003, so not it's been a few years since then. Um, but I still think it's pretty fresh in the zeitgeist, and maybe it was a little too close to when it happened for it to have like a holistic kind of look at it. Maybe I'm just speculating on this, where maybe Blonde being made this much time afterwards, it's possible that that amount of time helps us kind of have more of a complete picture of it perhaps, but also, I mean, actually, this reminds me of Cloud Atlas, where there was a scene where this old man has kind of like a spat with the nursing home, um, and like a disagreement, and then they adapt that into a film, like however many tens of hundreds of years later, and it's so glamorized by then, which I thought was that was the best part of the movie for me, was
Hmm.
them just having this very self-aware look at how Hollywoodizes things, where they have Tom Hanks portraying this moment as if it was this grander thing when it was really more of like an awkward spitting that he had at the time, and it shows it like a heritage moment. If you're in Canada, you know what those are.
Oh yeah.
And that's the kind of like over glamorization of these historical events that makes it really cheesy or maybe feel kind of cheap.
Well, to
Where it's like it's all sunlit and they're really kind of creating this like perfect image, like they it's like the people realize or understand the historical importance of what they're doing in the moment, which no one ever does. They just think they're just kind of going through life and shit happens, and then after the fact, people uh, look at it a certain way.
Well, Cloud Atlas is also going for something different as well. Like, it's
Oh,
literally
it's
a
a
movie
complete
about like
yeah,
looking at
yeah.
like how love kind of connects us through time and trying to take the good out of horrible sadistic situations. So I feel like it works better in that context versus like Life is Beautiful, which is basically like we're gonna make a sweet, happy, romantic comedy about the Holocaust. Like maybe something like that is a little
Well,
more questionable.
which
well,
I think Jerry Lewis had a pretty strong sense of self awareness after he made The Day the Clown Cried, and he's like, no one should ever watch this film,
locked
like
up.
period.
Yeah, buried.
Yeah.
And it's not even, it's just mediocre. But again, I think there's something about how close it was to that happening that he just felt in his stomach. No, because but just to take a step back to go like your question about would this have been better if we took a bit longer? I actually think the time is right here. I think the thing skewing it is her fame's resonance. I think for most people that passed away that long ago, it's pretty chill to do that. I mean, we just saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood do something kind of similar and like we don't care about the truth. We just want to do something to, for their own means, sure, but like to play with that reality in such a way. And
Hmm.
I think that it's these diehard fans and the fact that like so many like models and like big name I wouldn't even know what to call it, like big name actresses like grew up idolizing her and read
Icons.
they read everything about her. So they're the ones who like blew up and wrote think pieces that then everyone on social media is like, oh, they hated it, right? Like because it still had its roots in this generation. I think that
Mm-hmm.
made it too soon versus the actual physical time that had passed.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, there's something we're
I
not
think.
considering either is that, like, you can make stories heavily influenced by real historical events without technically making it about the real historical event. Like, let's circle back, Modern Warfare 2, like, maybe it was a little on the nose with its airport shooting, reflecting like 9/11 paranoia, but another, like we talked about before, how horror can be a great platform of exploring real themes. Let's circle back to something like Dead Space, where around that time, 2008, like with like the Iraq war going on and with like American turmoil, like people were like had this huge fear of like religion and these extremist views kind of changing people for the worse and driving them to do awful things like suicide and murder. And that's a huge part of Dead Space. Like, literally, minor spoiler alert, like the way you become a necromorph is that you're blinded by something called the marker and you actually commit suicide to turn into a monster. And it's literally this idea of your old self has become unrecognizable. You just become this violent, sadistic creature as you're kind of driven to nothing but violence after kind of losing your past self to these extreme beliefs. Like,
I'm
and that's like
wondering.
a subtle way of exploring that, though. Like, the King of Comedy is about Jerry Lewis, but it's not about Jerry Lewis. Like the
Right.
Accountant is kind of about people like Marilyn Monroe, but it's not about people like Marilyn
Yeah.
Monroe.
Like, what if this movie was called Blonde, and it's very much a it looks like a very direct kind of homage to Marilyn Monroe. I'm using sorry, it's an homage film. I'm sorry, Orson. There's another dead guy I'm apologizing to. Um, but what if it wasn't the story of Marilyn Monroe, but Minnie Mayfield or some other made up kind of name, where it's clearly trying to make a piece about this iconic figure, but it's not quite her. It's slightly altered, and maybe we'll be slightly more honest about the intent of the piece. That this isn't this is trying to be more true about Marilyn Monroe without it being Marilyn Monroe, and so we can get a little more creative leeway and liberty with how we, you know, present her image or how we tear it down, deconstruct her image. This film's
I
very
mean,
deconstructionist in that
not to
regard.
lean into IP too much, but like I do feel like it would not have gotten the same resonance and the same popularity. Like I feel like it would have been a really good movie that maybe like an eighth of the people saw. Like I feel
That's just
like
true.
as much as it is making a comment on all of this, it is still definitely aiding its ability to get asses in seats by having it be that. And they kind of did that in aspects, right? Like they never said Joe DiMaggio, they never said what's the other guy's name? But they allude he's just writer. You know what I mean? Like it's even how
Yeah.
they're listed on IMDb. So I think they
Mm.
did a bit of it, but they didn't. Like I agree. I feel like I would have loved the movie if it wasn't just branded as Maryland, but also might never have seen it. Right? It's a weird,
Yeah.
Well, I would have
weird
It,
seen
gray
it
it
because
would
area
it
it would
was
there.
be it
directed.
would be one of those movies that flew under the radar and may have gotten more of a cult following or more praise. Like, hey, here's a movie no one watched that actually is really good. It's sort of a deconstruction of Hollywood and fame that isn't Marilyn Monroe, but it very clearly is. But and it probably would have been something I would have found out about thanks to a video I see on YouTube.
Right? Yeah,
Right?
yeah. No,
Yeah.
so like I don't know. There is this, I don't know, gray area that was I guess we should say we don't have answers. The nice part about a panel is that, we have a bit of freedom to just kind of waffle
We
on
have
that, but like there's no strict answer to any of this. It's all
we
just
have
our opinions,
we have
right?
a lot of questions and not a lot of answers. It's like there's a lot to unpack here, but we should just burn the whole suitcase instead.
Right? I mean,
Boo. Suck.
Uh,
I think
um,
we've
yeah.
landed somewhere close. Like there's like an aspect of time, like there's an equation you could probably write of like
oh
time
yeah.
passing, and then like in brackets the person's like popularity, and like the longer you wait based on the more famous. I don't know. There's something there, but I'm not smart enough to
I'm
figure it out.
sure there's some crackhead in Hollywood
Hey
trying to
guys,
write
what did I
now.
miss?
Oh, hey,
Hey,
hey, Dad.
everything.
Speaking of crackheads in Hollywood,
Yeah, a little late for
you
the
know,
day.
there's probably someone writing an algorithm trying to figure out when to develop the next property of movie. Like, when's the right time to write a story about Marlon Brando or something? I don't know. Um,
We're
it's
probably due
probably.
for a Brando story right about. I don't know.
Oh yeah,
Well, would
that's
it
coming up next.
factor? Would it also factor in of whether it's a flattering portrayal of the person in question,
Well,
or
that's all
What
subjective.
yeah,
You
I
can't.
think for Marlon it might be a fattering portrayal. Heh,
uh,
the joke about how he gained weight in his later years.
For Maryland? What?
No, Marlon Brando.
Marlon Brando. Oh,
Marilyn
there.
Brando.
Yeah, I was gonna say. You said Maryland. I
Or,
was like,
or, or,
what?
or, or what about Marilyn Manson?
Yeah,
How about
that's.
that?
I almost thought you were leaning that way.
Nobody will
Yeah.
want a good depiction of Marilyn Manson now.
No, but there's stuff in his life. He could do the whole thing where he like got all drunk on stage and almost fit, or like he spat on some girl. I can't even remember anymore. But yeah, hey, that's there. There's your other Maryland movie. Somebody out there, make
Uh,
it.
well,
we got a few different there were a couple different Charles Manson movies that came out. Also,
Oh,
there
there
was
you go.
yeah.
like
Well, I mean, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood again.
yeah, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and then there was another one that really flew under the radar where Doctor Who
Oh,
played him, and it was the director of American Psycho. She made it, and apparently wasn't that well received.
Oh, that's
wait, was that the
unfortunate.
one with Hillary Duff?
yeah, that's the one I was thinking of.
Yeah.
The Sharon Tate
Oh
one.
God, no! You're not that
Oh,
one.
she didn't direct that one.
No, that this was different.
Okay.
That's the one I was
So, sorry, what was I gonna say? Oh yeah, yeah, it's kind of hard to say overall. Like, there's a way to do it right and a way to do it wrong. I'm not really mad at Blonde's intentions and goals, just more so with how they execute them. I think the
What do you
execution
think
is
of
just very
what
poor.
do you think of the point that people are saying that the director hates Marilyn Monroe? That this
I
is all
No,
a very cynical depiction.
I don't
no.
know if he hates her or as much as he kind of misunderstands her, but I don't really take that as hate. Just
Well,
more so that
I
like he kind of
never
has a
once
weird
watching
interpretation.
that entire movie. I never once got the impression that he hates her. If anything, I think he almost kind of like pities or is like,
That's what I mean. Yeah.
that
you
you
know,
know that I agree. Like I never got the sense that the director hates Marilyn at all. I think he's really trying to get to the heart of what her struggle was,
I think it's
which I think
just
is
because of his
Well,
like going.
I think is a noble
no.
attempt. Although the execution's dicey, I really love the artistic direction of it. Like there were so many sequences of like the bread sheets turning into a waterfall or stars turning to little sperm heads.
Oh my
Like
God,
I really
how trippy
Lovely.
was that though? Like honestly,
I fucking love those. Like those are some excellent transition shots, and I loved just how it was trying to unfold the story. It was so, uh, you know,
but yeah, to be fair,
it was
like
so
to break that
captivating
down
for
a bit
me.
more, I think a lot of that hate for him not understanding it comes down to like this quote that got spread around that was like, I don't care about the truth or the facts, I care about the visuals or something like that.
Well,
Where
also
like,
what he said
I
about
care
gentlemen prefer
about
blondes.
images. I care
yeah,
about images, which is like what a Chad thing to say.
but I do think there's something to that where it's being skewed, right? I think this is a visual
I
metaphor
agree.
heavy movie. And I think
Oh
his
yeah.
point was that it's not about that, it's about the feeling, it's about representing the mental health, it's about putting you in those shoes, it's about doing that all visually, it's about showing, not telling, as much as
Mm-hmm.
Ian thinks it shoved it all down your throat. As somebody who didn't know
Yeah,
anything about
literally.
Maryland,
Like
I think
JFK's
it barely
dick.
held my hand. I think I was trying to figure some things out on the go, and
No,
you know,
no,
I couldn't just whip my phone out in the theater, right? So I had to just, you know,
just like
figure it out.
JFK whipped out his dick. Yeah.
Oh, oh
low
And
man,
you're
blow.
shoving things down
Damn.
your throat.
Low
literally
blow.
a low blow.
Jesus.
But yeah,
I
I
like
think
that he was wearing a girdle the whole time too. That was hysterical.
right.
I feel bad that that scene was funny to me. Probably because I
I
had worse expectations going in. Um,
But that's the thing. People made this huge deal. Like I
uh,
even went in seeing it so early. There was already words about, oh, there's a JFK scene and people are talking about it. Dude, I was
uh,
expecting like that Harvey Weinstein level beginning
oh
scene,
yeah.
like where
Well,
I
no,
thought that was
yeah,
what we were gonna get. It's very subdued compared to what people are
oh,
making it out to
it's
be.
very
mm,
subdued. Although that opening scene of how she got her audition, it's like,
Oh,
oh,
it's so rough.
just like and she's like quoting that expression to herself, like there's a light of circles surrounding you. That was really sad, man. I mean,
But
there, there was
unabashed, like it didn't like as much as it didn't glorify, it didn't try and erase any of that. It put it right in front of
no,
you to have to deal
it
with,
showed
right?
exactly what she was going through, and I think that
Yeah.
was really, I think that's where this movie really does work, is where it does try to empathize with what you actually struggled with and what people don't want to see or don't know about, and yeah, I think people kind of misunderstand the intent of the film, though there's definitely some problematic elements to it, and that's a word I like to try to use lightly, problematic, but there it is again.
No, this is.
Um,
I know you like to avoid that. This is the time to use that word.
this is
You
the time
can't
to
fend off it completely when it's needed.
yeah,
Use it.
Well, there's
yeah.
also like a weird, like people are saying like it's a pro-life movie, like it's like an
Oh, that yeah.
anti-abortion movie. Like there was huge controversy surrounding that, and tons of
Yeah, that's the
Letterboxd
point I
Well,
was
reviews.
trying to
no.
bring up
No,
before. Yeah.
that's this is not pro-life. If anything, this is way pro-choice.
Yeah.
This is literally showing what happens when a woman has no choice over her body.
Yes.
Yeah, but people interpret that as like, oh, they make abortion look bad. I'm like, well, abortion is like a painful kind of
It is gnarly.
Yeah, but
gnarly
those people are
process.
already going
Like you need to
into
show
preconceived
that.
notions.
Yeah.
I mean, the
I
film goes too far, but I don't mind like the initial goals of trying to
I
go for something like
And I
I feel
mean,
kind of bad that I took the screenshot of that scene and I just wrote peekaboo.
oh, it's so horrible. But
that.
I
That's
think in
fun.
the same regard that we've been saying, like the biopic gets overpolished, let's acknowledge that maybe in the past 10 years, the abortion scene has got kind of polished. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of movies I see where, they arrive, they sit in a white room, they look sad. We maybe see like one or two shots with her of her legs up. It's like a close up of her face. She has a bad expression, and we move on. And you know what? The producers get to say they actually acknowledge something, but they didn't. You know what I mean? I feel like this is actually like
I don't know.
showing you how down and dirty what's happening, especially for the time. This isn't a modern day abortion. This is a 1960s abortion. I don't want to
Oh
see
yeah.
that. You know what I mean? I don't need to see those metal fucking duck mouth things ever again in my life.
Quack.
And again, sorry if this all hits. Just asterisks for those listening. Again, if you just joined in, don't know. My my spouse was 9 months pregnant when we went to see, or 8.5 or something. Far too far pregnant. We did not see
I'm
that coming. It scarred me a bit. So sorry for that.
I'm glad you didn't watch Nymphomaniac at the very least.
I mean,
I'd
I'm
seen
glad
that
you didn't watch
before,
it in
so
general.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
I've seen an Nymphomaniac, but like a long time ago in college. So no
Okay,
need
Yeah,
to
good.
rewatch.
fair enough.
There is no need.
No.
You know what? I know
And
this
avoid
isn't.
insight at all costs. It's not worth your time.
Never see you guys talking about it is enough for me personally.
Yeah, no.
God, yeah,
It's
fuck
one
that
of those
movie.
movies I can just tell you what happens and you'll get as much out of me, my description of it, than you watching it.
Probably more.
Fuck me.
It's not an abortion. It's more like a forced C-section, but it's not any less pleasant.
Ugh.
Yeah,
It's gross. Yeah.
it felt
Oh,
like one.
it's a pregnant woman getting revenge on another pregnant woman because they got into the least convincing car accidents I've ever seen in an indie movie. And I guess she lost her baby in the accident, so she vows revenge and kills everybody she loves.
Yeah, God.
What does this accomplish?
Nothing.
Jesus.
It looks like
This
shit. It sounds like shit. It's written like shit.
it's such a bitter, cynical, disgusting movie, and I didn't care for it.
Yeah, like it's. And it
I mean,
has such good reviews. Like it has like an 83% in Rotten Tomatoes. It has a 3.5 Letterboxd score. It has a higher Letterboxd score than this, which I didn't like Blonde at all, but I liked it way better than that piece of shit. So what's the deal?
Yeah.
Is it because it's
I mean,
French? Is it art? Like what is it?
I mean, there may be something about the feminine wrath and rage that this is a subconscious representation of that I'm just not getting. That's all. That's the only merit I can think for it.
But it's
Other
not
than
even
people
good.
that
That's my problem.
Yeah.
Like it's just an objectively poorly put together movie. Whereas
we
Blonde,
are all over the place tonight.
yeah, like whereas with Blonde, like it's terribly written, but I love Ana de Armas. I love the technical aspects.
It's at least
It's
a
She
something.
decent
deserves a
in
nomination, dude.
comparison.
She so deserves a nomination.
Yeah, she does. It
Oh,
deserves a
she
nomination for.
deserves to know. Michelle Yeoh deserves to win.
Yeah.
Ana de Armas deserves to be nominated.
Mia Goth deserves to win.
Just like how Ke Kwan deserves to win
Yes.
for best actor, but so
Sadly,
somebody
I don't
else.
think any of those.
He'll
are gonna
win
get
supporting.
nominated.
He might get
Maybe
supporting.
Anna.
Anna
Anna
will
de-
probably get
Yeah,
nominated.
Anna will
she's
get
got the
nominated.
best chance, but Michelle Yeoh and Mia Goth, yeah, I don't know. It's a
They
long
they
shot.
deserve them. There was so much competition for
fingers
Best
crossed,
Actress this year, by the way,
I
guys. There was so much competition. Like Little
yeah.
Women was great.
I still
Tar,
hope
yeah.
Little Women,
everything
what?
everywhere.
Oh, sorry,
I,
no. Women Talking. I
Oh,
apologize.
women talking.
Got
Yes,
that mixed up.
okay. A couple years ago, maybe.
It's a
they, they,
different
they, they
kind of
also
woman.
happen to be little and their voices are a little squeaky, but no.
Jesus Christ.
Honey, I Shrunk the Woman. Oh no, I can't do
Honey, I
it.
Shrunk the Kids. That was a trippy movie to watch as a kid. Honey, I Shrunk the
It
Kids.
still is.
Actually, no. I don't think I even saw the first one. I just saw Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves. It was even more
I
confused.
feel like I've got the same thing, but it was like the Family Channel version, not like
Oh yeah,
the actual movie.
I had it on VHS. I'm pretty sure we still do somewhere. Um,
Well, I
uh,
know this isn't review, but what would you guys give Blonde out of 10?
um,
Oh, that's fair. I mean, we heavily focused on it. Yeah.
my initial review probably would have been like Steven's, where this is like a horrifically beautiful Lynchian nightmare, but because it's about a real person, it's pretty dicey. I'm gonna give it a 6.9.
What
God
would you
damn it,
give
Devin.
it? Jesus.
No, yeah, I'm like I'm an 8.9. I feel like I sat on this for so long, and like over time it got better, and like the longer since I had to watch those rough scenes, the better I felt about the movie, which plays into it a little bit for sure. But yeah, like I'm sorry, man, I'm a cinematographer. I will reiterate,
True.
visual fucking jazz. I loved it. Like if only for how incredible the visuals were. The freaking waterfall transition, man.
Oh
The
yeah.
waterfall trade, the whole scene leading up
And
to
and
it,
she's
like
getting DP'd by Charles
Charlie Chaplin and
Char-
fucking well
by Charlie
his son.
Chaplin's kids. I mean,
Yeah, the
man, what
Jugos.
I made a joke early on in the podcast that no one heard, but I'm gonna say it again. What a Chad Charlie Chaplin was. Chadplin.
Chad
Chad Flynn,
Flynn,
boo.
yeah.
Oh yeah, that was
Well,
it's such a
Yeah,
groan
I will say
right
like
now.
that, like for how shallow you kind of described it, Ian. Like I feel like that whole arc between those two and like the note exchange and like how like that really does feel like the one like tightest relationship in like I don't know. There's something to the
I don't know
emotional
if I
arc of
agree.
this movie.
Oh wait a
You
minute, her
don't have to
father wasn't
agree.
real. Oh man.
Oh man.
Dude.
So
Hey,
you want to know
dude,
how
the final
polarizing?
shot though. Oh,
It looks cool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice looking movie. You want to know how polarizing this movie is? I'm giving this a 3.5 out of 10. I really did not enjoy this
Wow.
movie, and
well,
I
that's
thought it
really
was
even. Is
even
that a 5
worse. I thought
altogether?
it was even worse on a rewatch, to be honest. Yeah, I really did not like
Oh,
this
and you
movie.
what?
I'm
I have
sorry.
to see how it'll hold up on a rewatch. I'm comfortable giving it a 6.9. I stand by that. I was
Of
gonna
course
give
you
it
do.
higher initially, but I'm tapering that ever so slightly, so I'm not viciously attacked by the
Wait,
mob.
you say
Um,
3.5? What was your rating?
no, 6.9.
No, no, Ian's.
3.5.
Yeah, yeah. So,
One and a half
Wow.
stars. Yeah, I'm sorry. I
Mason,
could
how you
not
doing,
finish
man?
this movie.
We
oh yeah, what's up,
Mason.
Mason?
we had a couple other people pop in, but yeah,
Oh
we're talking
yeah.
about Blonde. We're
Hey,
talking about the
panel's
nature of
popping.
adaptations,
Mhm.
and just sort of using that as like as a linchpin for the discussion of adaptations and the ethics surrounding it.
Well, if you
Um,
guys are okay with it, now that we're here, there's a question I'd like to ask all of the guests in the chat. What is your favorite biopic, and what is your least favorite biopic? Now that we're all here together.
My favorite biopic of all time, and it's not the most original, and it's not like the most groundbreaking, but for me, Rocket Man has to be my favorite biopic.
Nice.
My least favorite biopic has to be Enfant Terrible, the biopic of Rainer Werner Fassbinder.
Really?
mm,
Is
I
it like
feel
not a good depiction?
it just depicted his more negative, the negative aspects of him, like the abuse, the the mistreatment of actors, the just like trouble causing stuff.
are
Not
you
like
are you saying that it wasn't warranted, or that you just made you uncomfortable to watch?
it's just like they just only they rarely show his good side. They only showed like his bad side. Like they forgot like he also did some good things while he did some bad things. they basically demonized him.
That's
And
Oh,
when you
okay.
unfortunate.
So it wasn't a balanced perspective then.
No.
No, it wasn't a balanced perspective. And the structure that Darryl and Ian and them brought up of blonde, like it could be applied to someone like Freddie Mercury. Well, I think this style of narration could be applied to Rainer Werner Fassbinder. Like in terms of not just like style of filmmaking, but also like actually show like him like good and bad.
To
Nice.
show like a balanced perspective. I think that
Yeah.
contrast is really good to hone in on, just
Really
generally
important.
speaking. It's nice to kind of balance the two. I don't know if we've seen any biopics of Stanley Kubrick, but I think you would have to like balance it where he's a legendary director, but he absolutely did some terrible things and treated his cast kind of poorly in many instances, and there's no escaping that. And I think that's very important. Like I really like The Shining as a film, but the way that Shelley Duvall was treated was absolutely terrible. And I think it's important to kind of show both sides of that, really. If we were to do an adaptation of Stanley Kubrick, I don't know if there has been one really directly about him,
I
more
mean, not
him.
directly, but my worst documentary, crazy you say that, is Room 237. So
Oh yeah,
Oh, I've heard all about that
I
movie.
it's
there,
just
there's a documentary about his assistant that I'm
But
still needing to
oh,
watch.
that one's
Daryl,
really good. I actually really like that one. Leon, his assistant.
Yeah, I've heard
Yeah,
about it. I
yeah.
haven't watched it yet.
It's a
I've
good
been
little
meaning to.
doc. It's definitely really skewed by Leon. He's like, yeah, I was basically his favorite person in the world, and everyone's like,
Mm.
well, we can't really
no.
confirm or
Yeah.
deny this, but he's like, yeah,
Can't qualify
it's
that.
his assistant, but it's also the lead actor from what was it, Barry Lyndon, one of the films. It was like, you know how he doesn't always like cast completely known actors.
Yeah.
Like he
Yeah.
hired him, and then the guy was just like, "I'm obsessed with things like you are." Sorry, I'm getting off topic. That's actually a really nice, quaint documentary. You should check it out if you get the chance.
Okay.
But
Oh,
my best one is obviously Walk Hard. I can't.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was
It's
gonna
my
say
10
I
out of
give
It
10.
Daryl
it
Sorry.
answer.
it
Yeah,
it it it,
We
it, it,
actually, funny enough, we did a video a while back as promotion for Vent where we kind of
yeah.
movies and we went over biopic. So yeah, you can watch that if you want to.
nice.
But
yeah.
Love and
Let's link
Mercy
it.
also
Insert selfish.
asterisk
Oh,
backup.
You should link it. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I I think Walk Hard's a better biopic than Walk the. I did myself a favor, and I watched Walk the Line before Walk Hard, but I still remember Walk Hard more than Walk the Line. Like it totally just blew it out of the water in every regard. I think my favorite biopic still would probably be Love and Mercy.
Good
I think
Yeah,
choice.
that
buddy.
that it's really hard to it's really kind of reinventing the biopic in a very good way. I think it really gets to the heart of what Brian Wilson was about, which I wasn't really a huge Beach Boys fan prior to that movie.
Same.
But having seen it and having gone through his journey, I am really appreciating how Brian Wilson is as a person and that and his music in general. So it really it helped them gain a fan. It wasn't just pandering to the fans, you know what I mean?
Yeah, agreed.
oh,
What's
yeah.
your worst biopic, Daryl?
Oh, Room 237.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
also
I mean, that's a
included
good
in
one.
that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Worst biopic, Devon. Before I say my
Uh,
choices.
Bohemian Rhapsody,
Yeah.
which is why I was wanting
Good
to rewrite
choice.
it. And weirdly enough, Blonde kind of plays out the way I was picturing Innuendo to play out, which is my own twisted version of what Bohemian Rhapsody could have been. But I am questioning that ever so slightly. But I'm also somewhat enthralled by just seeing it kind of done in that way. That I'd love to see Sacha Baron Cohen play Freddy on a completely debaucherous kind of fever dream, and then he hits kind of like a low point and he finds himself again. Um, yeah, I'd love to make that and see that happen.
My favorite biopic is The Social Network because it's not.
Hmm.
I think biopics that aren't like prioritized in being as accurate as possible or getting like the most actors that look the most like their characters. It's like, no, we're just gonna use the backdrop. This is a backdrop to tell an entertaining story. Like we're not gonna necessarily like highlight the fact that these are real people constantly. We're just gonna tell a great story, and that's what The Social Network does. Like any movie that can make Facebook interesting and exciting deserves massive credit because the creation of websites is something I cannot give less of a shit about. Until I watched The
Right.
Social Network, David Fincher made it possible. Worst biopic? Oh man, there's a lot of choices, but there's an awful Steve Jobs biopic. I'm not talking about Steve Jobs. That's a great movie. I'm talking about Jobs with Ashton Kutcher. Holy
I've
shit.
heard things about
If
that.
you want a textbook example of why Ashton Kutcher should never play a serious role, well, that movie is 2 hours of that. It is so bad.
Butterfly
Oh,
effect?
guys,
Excuse me?
no, Jobs is worse. He's worse than Jobs.
No, he's great in
Jim.
Butterfly Effect. What are you saying? The
Okay.
Drake for the
I haven't
Mud.
seen that, but
Really? You've
Yeah,
never
I
seen
Man,
Butterfly Effect?
I remember seeing it years and years ago. I do want to revisit it to see how it holds up to me.
Alternate
that
ending,
movie I
man.
remember
I gotta
very
say,
faintly as like a fever dream. Like,
yeah, it's
Yeah.
wild. The alternate ending's the way to go, though. I think
yes, I've heard that. I
Yeah.
haven't seen the ultimate ending
Yeah.
though.
it's the only.
Actually.
Dude, it took me like 7 years to find out that I had only seen the alternate ending. I got like almost in a fucking fight with one of my friends on like grade 9 because I was like, "No, it ends like this," and he was like, "Daryl, I saw it in theaters. I don't know what you're talking about." Yeah, wild.
That's funny. I need to see it still. I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, guys, we have to get a trilogy going with the
Oh,
Butterfly.
yeah, but do not watch Jobs. He is so bad.
No,
as
we will
someone
never
convinced
watch
you as
that.
Steve Jobs. Jamar, if you're able to hop on for a second, do you have a favorite and least favorite biopic?
Yeah, the baby hasn't been crying for a while. I wonder if she's still
Shh,
asleep.
don't jinx it. Come on, man. You know the golden rule.
No, you gotta acknowledge it, man. She's gonna cry eventually.
All right, Jamar.
I can't hear you if you're talking.
Do it.
Yeah, I can hear her talking in the other room.
Yeah, we can't hear you for some reason.
She's not muted though.
Yeah,
so-
she's not muted, so I don't know what's going on.
Is her microphone not on?
Yeah. What? Okay, well,
Hey,
Jamara,
Daryl, you
come
might
in here
have
and
to
use my
troubleshoot
headset.
that.
Yeah, come
Yeah,
get
there
my
you go.
headset.
Yeah, just go hug Daryl and tell him he's a good boy.
I am a good boy, okay?
Yeah.
I am
I don't
the
need
best
the reassurance.
of boys.
You're the man child of the house.
Yeah, I'm a lamb.
You
Good
know,
shit.
I'm a daddy.
One sec, she's just putting it on.
No,
I literally am
Aaron,
now.
no.
Fuck. I'm a papa because everybody ruined the word daddy.
Papa.
Authoritative.
Oh
but
man,
cool.
every time she said "daddy" in the film, I'm like, please stop. I mean,
Yeah.
I know she did that, but also it was very much
Also,
fed into the
no.
whole
Daddy issues for
Oedipus
film.
complex, I guess, or no, isn't it the Electra complex? When it's for women, Electra, yeah, pretty sure that's what it is.
It's authoritative, but fluid.
Okay.
I don't know how to interpret that, but
I don't know how to respond to that.
yeah, neither.
All right, I'm
Mason,
here.
I know you're
Hello.
listening. Oh, hi.
Sorry, it took a while.
Hi guys.
Hi.
Worst and best biopics. I'm kind of tied for first. There is one that I saw like a long time ago. Into the Wild. That's about a guy that gives up his money and goes off into the wild, and like it's just a really good like story of a
Oh
guy.
yeah, I remember watching that in school. That was a thing, and I think they were meant to see a cautionary tale, like don't throw away out your education because this will happen.
Yeah.
I'm like, but I think a lot of people ended up idolizing him instead.
But I also recently, like in the last couple years, Daryl showed me the movie La Bamba about
Ooh
Richie
yeah,
Valens, and I just like it stuck with me. Like it's so heartfelt and accurate, and it really made me love the music and love his origin story and the day the music died and all that stuff.
yeah.
Um,
I actually didn't even like hear about him prior to seeing it. Like we
yeah.
watched it because he recommended it, and I thought it was really good.
As far as worst though, I was looking at like a list of worst biopics. Because I couldn't really think of one. Like I don't know. It was funny on that list was Pocahontas, and I thought that was kind of funny.
I mean, they're right, but that is
Right?
the worst Disney movie. Did you know they actually thought that was going to be more successful than The Lion King? Like, they were actively bullying the studio making The Lion King because they thought that was going to be more successful.
Interesting.
Well, they were trying to win that Best Picture nod. Like the Beauty and the Beast was like, oh shit, animated films can win Best Picture. Well, now we've got something to shoot for, and Pocahontas was their best attempt. So.
And it didn't, yeah.
An attempt was made. I would certainly
Sure.
say. Thank you, Jamara. Mason, I know you're listening in. I don't know if you're privy to talk, but we are curious if you have an answer to your favorite biopic and your least favorite biopic.
I don't know if these count. I was actually gonna say Into the Wild, but I don't know
Oh,
if
nice.
these count. But I really like Passion of the Christ and Downfall, the one about like Hitler.
Those would count because those are technically real people, at least as far as we know. I mean,
And the one I think I'd get flack for this, but I'm not a fan of The Straight Story by David Lynch.
Oh,
Oh.
I have no opinion on that because I haven't seen it, but I'm curious. I've heard many people say that's a very wholesome movie.
What's
It
wrong
is
with it?
wholesome, but it's my least favorite from his.
Oh,
I
that's
mean,
But
I
I
can
don't watch a
understand
lot of
that.
biopics.
He's got some wild films. I got really turned on to Lynch thanks to you, actually. I think I was, you were the reason I saw Eraserhead, which I have that on
Okay.
Criterion now. Yeah,
Beautiful.
fantastic. Yeah, man. So thanks to you, I got into Lynch, which is weird because when I was like writing stuff at the time in film school, I felt like I was swimming in the same waters Lynch was, but kind of on my own terms. I didn't even realize we were sharing the pool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyways, thank you.
No
Yeah, no
problem.
worries, man.
Tad,
Thanks
what
for
about
Yeah,
you?
dude, good having you out,
thanks for
man.
listening.
Good having
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here patiently waiting my turn. That's
Yo, fuck you, Tad.
It sense some resentment here.
You're
Ugh.
too polite.
sitting here patiently waiting my turn. Best biopic, probably The Founder with Michael Keaton.
Oh
Fucking love
shit.
that movie.
That was you know what? We need to talk about that at some point. I had a whole McDonald's trilogy planned, which included The Founder and Super Size Me, and I
That's
think
on
it was
the.
Super Size Me 2. Probably. I
That'd be a
forget what
lot
the
of
third one was.
Mac and Me.
Mac and me.
Oh fuck.
Yes,
That's even
dude.
better. That is even better. Oh shit.
Put it in request
know,
form right now.
Okay, I have to rewatch The Founder, but I'm impressed that they even got away with making that. Like,
Oh, it's like a movie that like 100% slams McDonald's. Like, but like
well,
it also kind of like
actually, no. I
celebrates
think
it
this is
because
what I
it's
think it
one.
does. I think it slams Ray Kroc, but
Yeah.
but McDonald's still looks picture perfect, like commercial. Every time they shoot McDonald's, McDonald's itself is this perfect thing that
I
just
mean,
had some
kind of,
troubled
but not
stuff.
really, because
So
like
it kind of toes the line in a very fine manner where it's still commercially viable for the company, but it doesn't.
does
It
it
still
though?
takes a
Because
dirt.
like McDonald's like literally starts in the movie as like a family business, and then it just keeps getting corrupted over and over until like it gets to the point where it's like, yeah, the burgers aren't really burgers. The milkshakes don't even have milk in them. Like it just kind of like just gets progressively worse and worse.
I
And
mean, it's
all in
kind
the
of
name of like
it's ballsy as fuck the
profit.
fact they made it. Period. But I think they do a very good job towing the line to not tarnish the image of McDonald's itself, which I wish they did, even more so. But it does show it is very matter of fact about its troubled kind of business takeover with Ray
Yeah.
Kroc. We got to
Yeah.
talk about
And
that at
Michael
some point.
Keaton is
Fuck,
given
that's a
like
good answer.
fucking hell of a performance in
I
that
mean,
movie.
That
it's
is a
Michael
fucking
Keaton.
great
So.
answer. Holy shit, I completely forgot about that movie. It's we got
Worst film though, hands down, Gotti.
Yeah. Oh
Oh,
my
Gotti,
god!
I
I
forgot
should have
about
picked
Gotti.
that. Oh my god! I fucking hate that movie. It's so
There's the
boring.
5
Yeah.
families.
Oh,
It's like the 5 cities. Oh, dude, I can't even. So Tad and I had the greatest but worst watch of that, where like dude, I don't even. It felt like we were like an hour into the film. We paused it and it was 25 minutes, and both of us like lost it. We fully felt the time did like just it wasn't passing. God, it was so bad.
I don't even know what this movie is, and everyone's just like,
Oh, it's John
I get all this
Travolta.
stuff.
First off, that should tell you if you need to know. If you want a funny, bad John Travolta movie, just watch
How do you
The
spell
Fanatic.
that? G-A...
Gotti. It's like the meme. It's like
Gotti.
the meme.
Okay, but
because this
like
movie's a
that could be the
joke.
panel
Yeah.
for next week. It's just called Fred Durst. That's the whole topic. We could talk for like 4 hours about just how fucked up Fred Durst is. No, I joke, I kid. But y'all need to see God. Like Gotti's a trip and a half.
It's
a
so
fucking
boring.
train wreck, but it's a wonderful train wreck.
I don't know if I agree with that. It's so
No,
boring.
it's not a good trip. It's like a
I-
trip from like Manhattan to well, no, that's a good place. Like some flat place to some flat place in the US. Like it's not a good trip.
Yeah,
from one tip of Saskatchewan to the other.
There you go.
Yeah, just watch The Fanatic if you want a good, bad John Travolta movie. It literally opens with the incredible line, "Can't talk, now
Or-
got poo." Just fucking
Or
gloss
Face
over.
Off.
You
Yeah,
hear
Face
this
Off, yeah.
song? We used to listen to this back in the day. It just blares Limp Bizkit in his car. and
Yeah,
it's just
directed by
listening.
Limp Bizkit. It's like,
Did
come
it
Who
all
knows
for
what
the
he was
nookie.
doing?
Song.
Fred Durst. That's the whole episode.
Yeah. That is a
Fuck yeah,
hilarious
guys.
movie, though. Holy fuck. The scene where the maid is like beating him with the purse is like a slapstick comedy. Oh my god, so good.
I don't
Did
even
it
know
all
what
for
he
the
knew when he
nookie.
was making.
But we're going off topic here. Thank you guys so much for tuning into the first open-ended discussion. Special thanks to Arron Kramers, Jamara Forbes, Mason Buchko, and Tad Brock for joining in on the discussion at separate points. And thank
Daryl
you.
for hosting the thing.
Yeah, thank you, Daryl. You're the best.
Yeah, boys.
You're the
this has
best,
been fun as
Chad.
fuck.
This
This
was
is like
a lot of fun.
like fucking Moire after dark. I like it.
I like that.
We're just wild. But
Moire
yeah,
Moray
Noir.
after hours.
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. We'll figure something out. But honestly,
More
guys,
with
it's been
Moray.
super fun. Friggin' Ian, thanks for all the extra questions.
No
Fucking
problem.
really coming in clutch. I was gonna go a bit more jazzy like the movie, but that worked out quite well. So hey,
You like jazz?
right?
That was a
Let's
creepy
go.
version of it. But as always, guys, thank you so much for listening. And is it Thursday yet? Stay tuned for Conan. Don't watch Blonde, and have a good night. Or watch Blonde. Who knows where you'll lie on it. Try and go on with an open mind if you do watch it. And if you didn't like
Don't
it,
watch
well,
Blind
I tried
expecting
to.
a brunette.
Yeah.
Don't watch Blonde with your grandma. I think that's the takeaway.
Yeah, that is the
Oh yeah.
new episode title. Do not watch Blonde with your grandma. Have a good night, guys. Bye.
Fuck you. I'm gonna show